People talk about war, we consider its cost. Right now, at this very minute, while you're watching this video, the world is living in a regime of delayed strike when there has been no shot yet, but the consequences have already begun to ripple through the system. This is where the main illusion of modern wars lies. It seems that if missiles aren't falling and cities aren't burning, nothing is happening. But in reality, the most expensive thing possible is happening. The logic of the world is changing, and the war between the USA and Iran is not an event from the news, but a process that's already built into your daily life, into prices, into expectations, into fears, into decisions that are not made by you, but for you. Because global war begins not from the front, but from the nervous system of the economy. When negotiations are canceled, when harsh statements are made, when markets freeze in anticipation, it looks like a pause. But in reality, this is the moment when the meter starts spinning faster, because there is no vacuum in the world, and every conflict of this scale instantly turns into pressure on oil, gas, logistics, insurance, investments, currencies. And all this is not abstract terms, but a chain that very quickly reaches a specific person, even if they've never been interested in the Middle East and don't know where the Strait of Hormuz is, because this strait is not geography, but the narrow throat of the world economy, through which almost a fifth of all seaborne oil passes. When a threat arises there, the world reacts the same way an organism reacts to an artery being blocked, even before the actual stoppage occurs. This is precisely why analysts, financiers, and energy companies start getting nervous long before the first shot. They know war is not a moment, it's a trajectory, and the higher the probability of collision, the more expensive everything related to stability becomes, and the cheaper everything related to the future becomes. Here a paradox arises that is rarely explained in the news. War may not start, but its cost will still be paid, because markets, states, and corporations factor in the worst-case scenario in advance and pay for it now, which means you pay too, even if formally there's no war yet, because fear is also a currency, and it devalues everything around it. This is precisely why every escalation between the USA and Iran is always not only in headlines, but also in inflation forecasts, in budget revisions, in frozen projects, in rising credit costs, in shortening planning horizons. All this looks like background, like noise, until at some point a person catches themselves thinking that they've started living more cautiously, postponing decisions, counting money differently, feeling instability where yesterday there was confidence. This is the key moment because war of the modern type rarely comes immediately with destruction. First, it comes with a feeling that the future has become less reliable, more fragile, and noticeably more expensive. This feeling doesn't arise by itself. It's formed by specific signals. Politicians' statements, canceled negotiations, fleet movements, sanction threats, analytical reports that say in black and white that even a limited conflict in the Persian Gulf could lead to a spike in energy prices, a chain reaction in markets, and increased global instability. These reports are not read by ordinary people, but by those who manage money, logistics, and resources, and it's they who first start acting, raising prices, hedging, shifting risk to the end consumer. As a result, war turns into a tax that everyone pays except those who make the decisions. And this is the most unpleasant part of the picture, because it creates the feeling that you're watching someone else's game, but paying for it with your opportunities, your peace of mind, and your future. And the longer the conflict remains in a suspended state, the stronger this effect, because uncertainty is always more expensive than certainty, even if certainty is bad. And this is precisely why prolonged tension between the USA and Iran is more dangerous than a short and clear crisis, because it stretches the payment over time, turning war into a background state of the world where everyone lives in anticipation, where fear becomes the norm, where instability ceases to surprise, and where the cost of war ceases to be perceived as something extraordinary. It simply becomes embedded in everyday life, in receipts, in tariffs, in budgets, in decisions, and at this moment the most terrible thing happens. War stops frightening, but continues to take. Therefore, it's important to understand one simple but uncomfortable thing. When they talk about war between the USA and Iran, they're not talking about the future. They're talking about the present. Because the bill is already open, it's already growing, and the question is not whether war will start, but how much longer the world will pretend it's not paying for it. The world lives in a strange state when war hasn't started yet, but is already affecting how you live. This is precisely what makes the modern conflict between the USA and Iran especially dangerous, because it exists not as an event, but as tension, as expectation, as pressure that slowly but inevitably seeps into everyday life. You may not notice this until you catch yourself thinking that everything around has become slightly more expensive, slightly more unstable, slightly less predictable, and this slightly accumulates, turning into a system where every signal, every statement, every fleet or aviation movement, every intensification of sanctioned rhetoric instantly triggers a chain of reactions. These reactions live their own life, regardless of whether there will be a real strike or not. Because the market doesn't wait for war, the market lives on the expectation of war, and expectation is the most expensive of possible scenarios. It forces everyone to factor in the worst in advance. And when the worst is factored in, everyone pays, starting with energy and ending with people's habits. In this regard, any instability around the Persian Gulf is instantly reflected in the price of oil. And oil is not just fuel, it's the blood of the modern economy. It's transportation, food, logistics, electricity, production, and as soon as this blood starts flowing faster or slower, the organism reacts immediately. And you feel it not in the news, but in real life, in bills and receipts, in decisions that suddenly have to be reconsidered because the future becomes less reliable. At this moment, war ceases to be geopolitics, it becomes domestic. It enters the home quietly, without explosions, through rising tariffs, through delivery price increases, through frozen projects, through business caution, through investor fear, through pauses that arise where there used to be movement. This feeling is like a slowing of time. When the world seems to freeze, listen, wait. In this waiting, it loses money, confidence, and opportunities, because uncertainty is a tax that's levied daily and no one can evade it. This is precisely why modern war rarely looks like a sharp break. More often it looks like a gradual compression of space, where choices become fewer, decisions more expensive, and mistakes more fatal. You start noticing that companies are hedging, states are accumulating reserves, logistics is lengthening, insurance rates are rising, and people start living more cautiously, even if they can't explain why. This is not mass panic. This is rational fear built into the system, which turns into actions and actions into price, and this price is distributed around the world automatically without votes and signatures, because the system reacts faster than politicians manage to agree. This is where the feeling arises that war is already underway, although there are no shots. This happens because the consequences are already in action, because every day of tension changes the balance. And the longer this state persists, the more it becomes embedded in the norm. The less people notice that they're paying for a conflict in which they don't participate, and the more dangerous the process itself becomes, because war ceases to be an extraordinary event. War becomes background, and background is what people get used to. And when they get used to it, they stop asking questions. But it's precisely questions that are most important here. Who makes decisions? Who bears responsibility? And why the cost is always distributed downward to those who are simply living their lives. This is where it becomes clear that the conflict between the USA and Iran is not a story about two countries. It's a story about a system in which any tension in one node is instantly reflected throughout the entire network. And the denser this network, the faster the consequences spread. You may not follow the news, not understand the details, not comprehend the logic of geopolitics, but you're still inside because you live in a world where energy is the foundation of everything, where logistics connects continents, where money reacts faster than people, and where the expectation of war itself becomes a form of war. A quiet, drawn-out, expensive war. This form is most insidious because it doesn't frighten immediately, it gradually changes reality. At some point, you realize that you've started living differently, more cautiously, more tensely, more expensively, and this realization doesn't cause panic, it causes reflection. Because if war can influence the world without starting, it means the cost of war is not only destruction, it's the structure in which we live. And awareness of this structure is the only way to stop being just a passive payer and start at least seeing how exactly the bill is formed that's presented to the entire world. Now is not the moment when the world is waiting for war to start. Now is the moment when the world is already living as if it could start at any second. And these are fundamentally different states, because expectation is more dangerous than the strike itself. A strike is an event, expectation is a regime. In this regime, no one turns on sirens, no one declares an alarm, no one tells you, pull yourself together, something big is starting. The world simply changes its facial expression slightly. It becomes tense, cautious, nervous, and everything that used to be normal starts costing more, not only in money, but also in meanings. War no longer needs a beginning. It's enough for it to be possible. This is sufficient for systems to stop taking risks, for states to start clenching their fists, for corporations to factor in worst-case scenarios, and for markets to react to fear faster than to facts. At this moment, there's still no conflict, but there are already consequences, and they spread faster than any news. You may not be interested in geopolitics. This doesn't exempt you. You may not understand what's happening between the USA and Iran. This doesn't cancel the effect. Because in such conflicts, knowledge is not a pass to a safe zone. There is no safe zone here. There is only different speed at which the wave reaches different people. First, it passes through closed negotiating rooms and trading terminals, then through logistics, insurance, budgets, then through decisions to wait it out, postpone, not risk, and then it comes into everyday life in the form of fatigue, uncertainty, and a strange feeling that the future has somehow compressed, not collapsed, not disappeared, but become shorter, less distant, less bold. The most insidious thing, you can't point your finger and say, this is where the war started, because it didn't start. It simply became embedded in formulas, in calculations, in politicians' intonations, in the language of news, in the habit of living in tension. And the longer this lasts, the less chance that anyone will even notice the moment when the price became unacceptable. History has already seen such periods, when the world lived not with catastrophe, but with the expectation of catastrophe. And each time this expectation turned out to be expensive, very expensive, because fear is always monetized. It turns into interest rates, tariffs, restrictions, temporary measures that somehow remain forever, and no one asks for consent from those who pay for it. And here a key shift occurs that is almost never spoken aloud. War ceases to be something external. It ceases to be there. It becomes an environment, like weather, like background, like noise that people get used to. And at this moment, it begins to change not only the economy, but also thinking. People start agreeing to less, planning more cautiously, thinking shorter, living no longer forward, but so it doesn't get worse. It's precisely at such moments that the biggest decisions are made quietly, without discussions, without referendums, without loud announcements, because people's attention is occupied with something else: anxiety, survival, adaptation. And while someone is following headlines, the real work is going on below, under the news level, where the bill is being formed that will simply be presented later. Here arises the key question that almost no one asks aloud. If war can proceed without even starting, if it can affect your life without a single shot, if it's already embedded in prices, decisions, and fears, then who is actually in the zone of defeat? The answer is unpleasant, because in this war, you're not a soldier and not a spectator. You're a line item of expenses. The war between the USA and Iran, even if it never enters an open phase, already exists as an economic, psychological, and political factor. And this factor works against everyone who doesn't participate in making decisions but pays their bills. Our channel exists precisely for this, not to amplify noise, but to analyze what actually stands behind loud headlines, what invisible mechanisms are triggered, and why the world changes even before events occur that will later be written about in textbooks. Because while they shout about war, its cost quietly enters our everyday life. And the only way not to lose orientation in this time is to learn to see not only explosions, but also numbers, meanings, and consequences that stay with us much longer than news cycles. If after this video you caught yourself thinking that you've started looking at what's happening slightly more attentively and calmly, it means we're doing exactly what we should. Not explaining who to root for, but helping to understand what everyone ultimately pays for.